One moment. I need to confirm something.
That call may be for me.
Northgate Operations requesting verification for Dr. Simone Reed.
Open the case, or turn the vehicle around. Sheriff Wade Harlan stood beside the driver's window on County Road 18 while traffic crept around a temporary checkpoint. Dr. Simone Reed, a 41-year-old black woman in a charcoal blazer and narrow braids pinned at her neck, had already handed him her license and a federal movement order authorizing her to continue to Northgate Defense Annex. Harlan glanced at the seal and at the black equipment case strapped into the cargo area. I asked what you're doing out here. Not for a stack of fancy paper. Simone kept both hands visible on the wheel. The order answers that question. The case is sealed, so I can't open it roadside. She nodded toward the document. There's a verification number at the bottom if you need to confirm it. Deputy Eli Mercer stood a few feet behind Harlan with a handheld reader clipped to his vest. He had scanned the square code on Simone's order before the sheriff arrived. The screen had flashed green. Simone had seen it, so had Mercer. Harlan had not asked what the result meant. Instead, he folded the paper once against his palm. People who cooperate don't make simple things complicated. What exactly am I refusing to do? Simone asked. Harlan gave a short laugh meant for Mercer. There. That right there. You've got an attitude about every instruction. I'm trying to figure out why somebody in a rental SUV is pushing through a restricted corridor with a locked case, and you want to cross-examine me. The checkpoint existed because a utility crew was replacing a damaged signal cabinet half a mile ahead. It narrowed the road but did not close access to the annex. The detour plan was attached to Simone's movement order. A white pickup had been waved through 2 minutes earlier after its driver said he worked for a paving subcontractor. No document scan, and no request to open his toolbox. Simone noticed the difference but kept her voice even. She had a 9:20 check-in and work waiting beyond the gate. Please verify the order, she said. If the road is closed to authorized traffic, I'll turn around. If you want to search the vehicle, tell me the basis and I'll respond to that. Harlan's mouth flattened. Step out. Behind him, Mercer raised the scanner. Sheriff, the credential came back valid. Harlan did not turn. I heard you. Simone unfastened her seatbelt. Her first instinct was to make Mercer repeat the result for the body camera, but she stopped herself. 2 years earlier, a security review had spent more time discussing her delivery than the failed access control she had found. She hated that the memory still shaped her timing. She stepped onto the gravel shoulder. I'm complying with the order to exit. I do not consent to a search of the case. Harlan took the keys from the ignition. You don't get to dictate the terms of a traffic stop. Simone answered, I didn't. Down the road, a compressor coughed to life and rattled the metal sign beside the work zone. Off 4's traffic use east lane. Harlan looked at Mercer. That tone is exactly the problem. He told Mercer to cuff her for obstruction while he called the county intake desk. Mercer hesitated. Sheriff, she did exit and the pass is valid. Harlan finally faced him. I'm not debating this on the shoulder. Do your job. Mercer secured Simone's wrists, checked the spacing, and said under his breath, they're double-locked. At the county substation, Harlan typed the arrest narrative himself. Simone sat on a molded plastic bench while an air vent lifted the corner of a property form. Her phone, badge wallet, keys, and sealed case had been logged separately. She watched Harlan enter argumentative and repeatedly non-compliant before adding obstruction to the booking sheet. Mercer reminded him that the federal credential had verified. Harlan replied, valid credential doesn't excuse behavior. The booking clerk stamped the intake time, 9:17 a.m. Harlan slid the sheet into the tray and looked satisfied. Simone read the time upside down. Her Northgate check-in was 3 minutes away, and the sealed case was supposed to be inside the annex before the next transfer window opened. She had given Defense Command one standing instruction for mornings like this. If she missed check-in, do not assume she was delayed. Verify where she was. At 9:22, the substation phone rang on the booking clerk's desk. Sheriff Harlan was still standing beside Simone's property tray, explaining to the clerk that the sealed equipment case should be listed as unverified contents when she picked up. Her expression changed after the first sentence. Yes, Mom. She's here. She listened, glanced toward Simone, then covered the receiver. Sheriff, Northgate Defense Command is asking for you. Harlan gave Simone a look that suggested she had arranged the call herself. Who exactly did you contact? Simone held up her cuffed hands. You took my phone. He stared another second before accepting the receiver. Sheriff Wade Harlan. His tone softened almost immediately. Yes, Mom, we have an individual here. There was a roadside issue involving restricted access and some concerns about cooperation. Simone watched the language change. On County Road 18, he had called her argumentative. Now, speaking to someone whose authority he recognized, the arrest had become an issue. The caller identified herself loudly enough that Simone caught the name through the handset. Major Lena Ortiz, each officer for Northgate Defense Command. Ortiz did not demand Simone's release. She asked whether Dr. Simone Reed had been detained, whether her issued movement credential had been scanned, and whether a sealed transit case bearing a defense inventory tag was in county custody. Harlan's eyes moved toward the black case. We have a case, he said. I can't verify what's inside because she refused inspection. Simone leaned forward. Tell her, the credential scanner returned valid. Harlan lifted one finger at her without looking away from the phone. She's continuing to interrupt, Major. Deputy Mercer shifted beside the booking counter. The movement was small, but Simone noticed him look down at the scanner still clipped to his vest. Its verification history had not yet been cleared. Ortiz's voice remained level. Harlan listened, then said, I understand what the paperwork says. My concern was behavior at the checkpoint. A pause followed. No, I'm not suggesting the credential is fraudulent. I'm saying valid access doesn't mean someone can ignore lawful instructions. He glanced at Simone as though the sentence had settled something. Exactly. Safety and cooperation. Simone spoke to the booking clerk instead. Can you note in the intake record that the credential was verified before the arrest? Harlan covered the receiver. You need to stop managing the room. She looked at him. I'm asking for an accurate record. His smile was thin. And that attitude is why we're here. Mercer cleared his throat. Sheriff, she's right about the scan. Harlan's shoulders stiffened. Mercer continued before he could be cut off. 912. Federal movement credential. Valid status. Active corridor authorization. The booking clerk's fingers stopped over her keyboard. Harlan said, Nobody asked whether the card scanned. We're dealing with conduct after the stop. That was the second time Simone heard him separate the credential from the arrest, and the distinction mattered. On the shoulder, he had treated her access as suspicious. Now that Defense Command had confirmed her identity, suspicion had become conduct. She looked at Mercer. Does that device keep the timestamp? Mercer hesitated, then nodded. Locally until the shift sync. Harlan said, Deputy. Just the title, but Mercer understood the warning. Ortiz apparently asked another question. Harlan turned away from Simone. Case is secured in our property area. His expression tightened. No, Major. Nobody has opened it. Another pause. I'm familiar with preservation requests. He reached for a pen and wrote something on the booking sheet with unnecessary force. You can send whatever notice you believe is appropriate. When the call ended, Harlan returned the receiver to its cradle. Defense Command wants the case untouched pending transfer verification. Fine. He looked at the clerk. Add a hold notation. Then he pointed at Simone. But she remains booked. Federal employment doesn't erase county charges. I didn't say it did, Simone replied. I asked you to verify what happened. Harlan picked up the arrest narrative and added a new line. Subject repeatedly challenged lawful authority after being advised to cooperate. Mercer watched the pen move. Then, without announcing what he was doing, he removed the scanner from his vest, opened the verification history, and photographed the 9 and 12 result, with the county-issued evidence tablet before the automatic sync could overwrite the screen. The clerk finished entering Harlan's amended narrative. At 9:26, the system changed Simone's status from temporary roadside detention to formally booked on obstruction pending supervisory review. The wrong version of the stop now had a case number. The booking clerk removed Simone's cuffs at 9:31, but only so she could be fingerprinted. A blue line on the floor marked where detainees were supposed to stand, and Harlan positioned himself beside it while the scanner warmed beneath Simone's fingertips. Her Northgate appointment had already passed. She pictured the transfer room she should have been entering, its grounded work tables and numbered tamper seals, and forced herself not to calculate how many people were now waiting because one sheriff had decided a question sounded disrespectful. Phone call after processing, Harlan said when she asked to contact counsel. Everybody else. Simone looked toward the booking clerk. Is that written policy or his instruction? The clerk glanced at Harlan before answering his instruction for this booking. Simone nodded once. Please note that I asked at 9:32. Harlan exhaled through his nose. You really cannot help yourself. No, Simone said, then immediately regretted the answer. It sounded sharper than she intended, and Harlan seized on it. Exactly. He turned to the clerk. Add continued argumentative behavior. Simone closed her eyes for half a second. She had just handed him another phrase he could detach from context. Staying composed did not mean she never became angry. It meant anger had to survive being translated into someone else's paperwork. Mercer returned from the property room carrying the evidence tablet. Case is tagged and separated. Defense hold is attached. Harlan asked whether the scanner had synchronized. Mercer paused. Not yet. Simone caught the pause, but not its meaning. Harlan told him to dock it before lunch, then walked toward his office with the arrest packet. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed the call from Northgate had changed nothing important. At 9:38, the station received a secure fax from Northgate Defense Command. It did not order the county to release Simone. Major Ortiz requested preservation of the sealed transit case, the credential scan result, body camera footage, dispatch audio, and all records concerning the stop because Simone's missed arrival had triggered an internal security incident review. The booking clerk read the first page twice before carrying it to Harlan. He came back holding it by one corner. They're protecting their employee. That's their business. Simone studied him. Does it say employee? Harlan's gaze dropped to the page. It says Dr. Reed. Then maybe don't improve the document for them. Mercer looked away, but Simone saw his mouth tighten, as if he were suppressing something between a laugh and discomfort. The second page changed the practical problem. Northgate had suspended the morning transfer window because the sealed case had left its documented route and entered county custody. Nothing dangerous had been released, and no emergency was declared, but the annex could not simply replace the shipment. The chain had to be reconstructed before the case could move again. Simone's 11 o'clock certification session was canceled along with it. That hurt more than she expected. Her younger brother had driven overnight from Tennessee to attend the small family dinner she had planned after the certification. Simone had spent 6 months promising him this assignment would finally end without swallowing another weekend. She asked for her phone again, this time to tell him not to wait. Harlan said, after supervisory review. Sheriff, Mercer said, county procedure usually allows a personal call once identification is complete. Harlan looked at him. Usually. Mercer held the look a moment longer than before. Her identification is complete. Harlan collected the facts and walked back toward his office. Then the supervisor can decide. When he was gone, Mercer placed the evidence tablet on the booking counter. I preserved the scan before docking the reader. Simone studied him. Why? He rubbed his thumb along the tablet's rubber edge. Because I heard him say you wouldn't identify yourself. You did. I was standing there. He stopped, then added, I should have corrected him the first time. Simone could have thanked him and made the moment easier. Instead, she said, you should have. Mercer accepted it without protest. The booking clerk slid a county complaint form across the counter and quietly pointed to the records section. Simone requested preservation of Mercer's scanner history. Both body cameras, the checkpoint dispatch log, the original arrest narrative, every amendment, and the Northgate fax. She did not accuse Harlan of racism on the form. She wrote only what she could prove had happened and when. At 9:47, she signed the request. The clerk stamped it received and entered the document under the same case number Harlan had created 21 minutes earlier. Whatever happened next, his version was no longer the only official record. At 10:03, Simone was finally given her phone. The supervisory review had not happened, but the booking clerk had stopped waiting for Harlan to approve every ordinary step. Simone called her brother first. Marcus answered before the second ring and started with, You better not be calling to cancel dinner. She looked through the wired glass window toward Harlan's office. I need you to cancel the reservation. The joke disappeared from his voice. She told him she was safe, left out the handcuffs, and asked him not to drive to the station. Marcus knew her well enough to hear what she omitted. Simone, where are you? She rubbed the indentation the cuffs had left above her wrist. County substation outside Northgate. It's being handled. He asked whether she wanted him there. Her first answer was no, too fast and too familiar. The Their mother had spent years telling both of them that Simone could turn needing help into a private competition. She corrected herself. "Stay near your phone. I may need you to pick up my car later." Marcus waited, then said, "That sounds more like a request." Across the room, Mercer was called into Harlan's office. The door remained partly open. And Simone could not hear everything, only Harlan's low voice and an occasional word. Instructions, commands, safety. When Mercer came out, he carried a supplemental statement form. He stood at the counter reading it without writing. Harlan followed. "You heard me tell her to cooperate," Mercer said. "I heard you tell her to open the case." Maybe. Then I heard her ask whether that was a search. Harlan's expression tightened. "You're splitting hairs after the fact." "That's what the camera is for," Mercer replied. It was the first time he had challenged him without cushioning the sentence. Harlan reminded him that a sealed container on a restricted route presented an officer's safety concern. On the surface, Simone understood why the argument could sound reasonable to someone reading a report later. The problem was that Harlan had never treated the case as an immediate danger. He had stood beside it, transported it, and left it in ordinary property storage until Northgate ordered preservation. Simone ended the call with Marcus and asked the booking clerk for the time of the property entry. The clerk checked the screen. 9:20. Simone asked when the defense hold had been entered. 8:26. She wrote both times on the back of her complaint receipt. If Harlan truly believed the case posed an urgent threat, 6 casual minutes in the standard property area would be difficult to explain. At 10:11, another call came in, this one, from the county operations lieutenant assigned to review arrests involving outside government credentials. He did not order anyone released. He instructed the clerk to suspend transfer to the detention center until he could review the body camera footage and dispatch log. Harlan objected from across the room. She was arrested for conduct, not credentials. The clerk repeated the lieutenant's instruction and changed Simone's status to supervisory hold. Harlan walked to Mercer's workstation, docked the scanner. Mercer did. The device synchronized with the county system, and the 912 verification appeared in the shift log. Harlan stared at the screen. Add context that the scan happened during an evolving stop. Mercer said he could add what happened after the scan but not change what the scan showed. Harlan's voice dropped. "Nobody asked you to change anything." The booking clerk stopped typing for a moment. Simone recognized the maneuver because she had seen versions of it in technical reviews. Nobody deleted the bad reading. They surrounded it with enough interpretation that a later reader might forget what came first. She asked for the supplemental records request form and added the scanner synchronization log. Then she made a mistake. Frustrated, tired, and thinking about Marcus sitting alone with a dinner reservation he had driven 7 hours to make, she added, "and preserve every other federal credential stop from this checkpoint." The clerk looked uncertain. "That's broader than your incident." Simone's knew it as soon as the words left her mouth. She had no basis yet to demand a pattern review. Harlan gave a humorless smile. "Now we're conducting investigations from the booking bench?" Simone crossed out the sentence herself. "No, Billy, that was too broad. Preserve my case records." Admitting it irritated her, but leaving an unsupported demand on the form would have helped him more than her. Mercer watched her strike through the line. Then he looked toward the checkpoint activity log still open on his monitor. "Sheriff," he said, "Operations is asking why Reed's credential scan is the only federal access scan recorded this morning." Harlan turned. Mercer scrolled once. "We waved 2 contractors through before her. Neither credential field was opened." For the first time, the question inside the station was no longer whether Simone had shown attitude. It was why the checkpoint procedure seemed to have changed when she arrived. County Operations Lieutenant Daniel Cho arrived at 10:24 wearing a rain shell over his uniform and carrying no visible urgency. That seemed to bother Harlan more than if he had stormed through the door. Cho asked for the arrest packet, the scanner history, and the body camera files, then told Simone, "I'm reviewing the detention decision. I'm not deciding your complaint today." Simone appreciated the distinction. Understood. Harlan started to explain the checkpoint before Cho had opened the first file. Cho raised a hand. "Ethan, let me see what happened before you tell me what happened." They used the interview room because it had the largest monitor. Simone remained outside with the booking clerk, but the glass partition gave her a partial view. Mercer stood beside Cho while Harlan leaned against the table with his arms folded. The video began with road noise and the compressor hammering near the signal cabinet. Simone watched herself hand over her license and movement order. Mercer scanned the credential. Green status. Harlan arrived 17 seconds later. Cho replayed the next minute. The audio captured Simone explaining that the case was sealed and offering the verification number. It captured Harlan as she was making this difficult before he had asked Mercer about the scan. Then came Simone's question about the basis for a search, followed by Harlan's first use of the word attitude. Cho stopped the video. Through the glass, Simone saw him turn toward Harlan. "I had a security concern," Harlan said. Cho pointed at the frozen frame. "When did you form it?" "When she refused to open the case. You called her difficult before that refusal." Harlan looked toward Mercer. "This is why clips need context." Mercer answered, "That's the continuous recording." Cho resumed playback. The white contractor pickup appeared briefly at the edge of Mercer's camera before Simone's SUV entered the checkpoint. Cho rewound. "Who's that?" Mercer identified the paving subcontractor. Cho asked whether the driver had been screened under the same restricted access procedure. Harlan said the crew was known to the checkpoint. Mercer shifted his weight. "I didn't know him." That answer sent Cho back to the activity log. The morning entries showed 2 contractor vehicles admitted on verbal identification. Simone's was the first credential scan and the only roadside search demand. Harlan argued that circumstances differed because she carried a locked container. Cho asked whether either contractor vehicle had enclosed tool storage. Mercer said both did. Harlan replied that construction equipment was expected. Simone heard the distinction through the cracked interview room door and felt something settle unpleasantly in her stomach. A metal toolbox had been ordinary. Her sealed case had become suspicious before anyone checked what her authorization covered. At 10:41, Major Ortiz called again. Cho took the call on speaker with Simone's consent. Ortiz confirmed that Simone was not transporting a weapon, explosive, or hazardous material. The case held a calibrated diagnostic unit assigned to a communication security certification scheduled that morning. Simone was the civilian systems assurance lead authorized to sign the certification results, but Ortiz made clear that her job title did not grant immunity from county law. "Our concern," she said, "is that Dr. Reed's verified movement order was treated as unreliable, and the resulting detention interrupted a controlled transfer." Harlan looked almost relieved. "So she's a contractor." Simone met his eyes through the doorway. The word told her what he had been waiting for. A rank impressive enough to justify treating her differently after the fact. Ortiz answered before Simone could. "She is a federal civilian employee, sheriff." But that is not the relevant point. Her access authorization was valid when your deputy scanned it. Cho ended the call after arranging transfer of the sealed case through Northgate security personnel. Then he returned to Harlan's arrest narrative. The first version said Simone had failed to identify herself. The amended version emphasized repeated challenges to authority. They mentioned that the credential had verified before Harlan ordered the case opened. Cho placed both pages side by side. "Why is that fact missing?" Harlan's answer came slower. "Because the arrest was based on her conduct afterward." Mercer spoke from the wall. "He told me at the roadside she might be using fake federal paperwork." Harlan turned sharply. "I said we didn't know what we had." Mercer shook his head. "No, Sheriff. You said fake paperwork." Cho did not argue about the wording. He instructed the clerk to release Simone from custody on her own recognizance, while the county prosecutor reviewed whether the obstruction charge had a sufficient factual basis. The charge was not dismissed. Harlan was not suspended. Instead, Cho removed him from checkpoint command for the remainder of the shift and ordered preservation of the full morning activity log and continuous body camera files. Simone collected her phone and keys. Northgate Security took custody of the sealed case. As she signed the property return sheet, Cho told Mercer to accompany him back to County Road 18. "We're going to reconstruct the checkpoint procedure vehicle by vehicle." Harlan asked whether that was necessary. Cho folded the 2 versions of the arrest narrative together. "Now it is." By 11:06, Simone was back at County Road 18, this time in the passenger seat of a Northgate security vehicle, while Sergeant Priya Nand drove the sealed diagnostic case toward the annex. Simone could have gone with it, Major Ortiz had offered to move the certification to the afternoon if the equipment passed chain of custody inspection. Instead, Simone asked to stop at the checkpoint. The arrest might disappear into a prosecutor's rejection. The procedure that produced it could remain untouched. Cho had reduced the checkpoint to one lane and ordered deputies to process every authorized vehicle by the same written standard. Mercer stood beside the folding table with the credential reader. Harlan was nowhere near the cones. Two county supervisors had taken over traffic control while Cho reconstructed the morning from the activity log. The compressor had been shut down, leaving the place strangely ordinary. Gravel, orange mesh, sun warming the blacktop. "You don't have to stay for this," Nan told Simone. "Northgate needs you more than the county does. That's exactly why I'm staying 10 minutes. Nan gave her a sideways look. "You said that about an hour ago." Simone almost smiled. "Then, somebody should stop letting me estimate time." The first test vehicle belonged to the same paving subcontractor whose truck had passed before Simone. Cho asked the driver to repeat what he had done that morning. The man pointed toward the checkpoint table, rolled down the window, said I was with Grayson Paving. He waved me through. Mercer confirmed it. No credential scan, no inspection request. The driver had a locking steel chest bolted behind the cab, large enough to hold far more than Simone's case. Cho asked what policy allowed verbal recognition to substitute for verification. Neither supervisor could identify one. Harlan's written checkpoint instruction, printed from the morning briefing system, required confirmation of access status for unfamiliar vehicles entering the controlled corridor. It did not require opening containers. It permitted a vehicle inspection only when officers could articulate a separate safety or enforcement basis. "That doesn't prove why he stopped me differently," Simone said. Cho looked up from the instruction sheet. "No. It proves the procedure he says he was enforcing wasn't the procedure on paper." She appreciated that answer because it left room for what they did not know. Nan did not. "You have video, an inconsistent report, selective scanning, and a false statement about identification. What more does the county need?" "A review that survives somebody saying we decided first and assembled reasons later," Cho said. Nan folded her arms. Meanwhile, she lost a controlled transfer and got fingerprinted. Simone touched Nan's sleeve. "He's not wrong." The admission cost her more than she expected. She wanted speed now. She wanted Harlan removed from duty, the charge erased, and somebody with county letterhead to use the word discrimination without making her carry it into the room first. But she also knew what happened to findings built faster than the evidence could hold them. She had spent 15 years rejecting technical conclusions that felt right but could not yet be demonstrated. Mercer interrupted from the checkpoint table. "Lieutenant, I found something in the original activity sequence." He turned the monitor so Cho could see. The system automatically created a time marker whenever the credential reader was activated. The contractor vehicles had no markers. Simone's entry showed the 912 scan, followed 8 seconds later by a manual incident flag from Mercer's terminal. Cho asked who had entered the flag. Mercer stared at the operator field. "Sheriff Harlan." Simone frowned. "He wasn't beside my window yet." They checked the body camera timestamp. Harlan's cruiser stopped behind Mercer at 9:12 and 14 seconds. He reached Simone's window 17 seconds later. The manual flag had been entered from the mobile terminal inside his cruiser before he spoke to her. Cho did not call it proof of bias. He asked what the flag meant. Mercer read the code description aloud. "Elevated compliance concern. Officer discretion." Nan looked at Simone. "Before he heard your attitude." Simone did not answer. That was what the timestamp suggested, but suggestion was not enough. "Can the terminal show what information he had when he entered it?" Cho nodded toward the county technician arriving in a utility vehicle. "That's the next test." Simone looked down the road as Northgate's security SUV disappeared through the annex gate with her case. Her new goal was no longer an apology or even dismissal of the charge. She wanted the county to determine whether Harlan had marked her as a compliance problem before she had done anything except arrive. The technician opened Harlan's cruiser terminal archive. The cruiser archive did not contain a confession. It contained timestamps, and Lieutenant Cho treated them with more caution than anyone else at the checkpoint wanted. At 9:11:48, Harlan's patrol computer had received the rental SUV's plate from the cruiser camera. At 9:12:03, Mercer radioed that Simone's federal credential had returned valid. 3 seconds later, Harlan opened the discretionary incident menu. At 9:12:06, he selected elevated compliance concern. He did not reach Simone's window until 9:12:31. Harlan arrived from the substation while the county technician was exporting the audit. "You're turning 30 seconds into a conspiracy," he said. Cho handed him a printed copy of the checkpoint instruction, then explained the 30 seconds. Harlan looked at the terminal log. "I saw a driver holding up the line with federal paperwork and a locked load. I marked the stop for closer attention." Simone stood beside Nan near the folding table. "You hadn't seen the case." Harlan looked at her. "I could see equipment in the rear." The technician pulled up Harlan's forward-facing cruiser video. Simone's SUV filled most of the frame from 30 yards back. Reflections off the rear glass obscured the cargo area. Cho asked the technician to freeze the image at 9:12:06. Nothing resembling the black case was visible. Harlan changed his explanation. "Then Mercer must have mentioned it." Mercer shook his head. "I didn't see the case until you asked her what was in back." Cho wrote both answers on the review sheet. Harlan saw him do it. Treating normal memory like dishonesty. Cho replied that imperfect memory was normal, which was why the county had preserved the recordings. He then asked Harlan to walk through the arrest from the beginning without using words such as attitude, operation, or disrespect. "Tell me the action she took that became obstruction." Harlan pointed toward Simone. "She refused a lawful inspection." "Which inspection authority?" "Officer safety." Cho tapped the checkpoint order. "That's a purpose." "An authority." Harlan tried again. Simone had questioned instructions, delayed compliance, and created uncertainty around a sealed container on a restricted route. Cho played Mercer's body camera through the exit order. Simone unfastened her seatbelt within seconds, stepped out, and stated that she did not consent to a search. Harlan had not told her she was being detained because of a specific crime, nor had he identified an emergency requiring the case to be opened. He had called her argumentative before ordering her out. Simone listened without interrupting until Harlan said, "Anybody can sound reasonable when you dissect a stop afterward." That finally pulled her into the exchange. "Then don't dissect my tone. Dissect your decisions." She heard how polished the sentence sounded and disliked it immediately. She added less neatly, "Sorry. What I mean is, you wrote my attitude down 6 times. Write down what I actually did." Cho asked the prosecutor assigned to preliminary charging review to join by secure video from the county office. He showed her only the relevant sequence: valid scan, discretionary flag, first contact, search request, exit order, arrest, and the 2 versions of Harlan's narrative. The prosecutor did not rule on discrimination. She focused on the obstruction charge. "Sheriff, what lawful duty was Dr. Reed preventing you from performing?" Harlan answered that she interfered with checkpoint security. "How?" She challenged every direction. "That describes speech." She refused access to the container. Was opening the container legally required at that point? Harlan stopped answering. Mercer then supplied the part that changed the review from a disputed arrest into an accountability problem. He admitted that after Harlan ordered the cuffs, Harlan told him not to mention the successful credential scan over dispatch because "we're past that now." Mercer had not included the remark in his first supplemental statement. Cho asked why. Mercer looked at Simone before answering. "Because I was afraid I'd be accused of undermining the sheriff." The prosecutor requested preservation of Mercer's statement and told Cho she would not authorize the obstruction charge on the record currently before her. Formal dismissal still required processing through the county system. Detention could no longer be justified by that charge. So Simone asked for 3 things: written confirmation when the charge was cleared, an independent review of Harlan's checkpoint decisions, and protection against retaliation for Mercer and the booking clerk. Cho wrote each request down, and the county technician looked up from the activity terminal. "Lieutenant, the checkpoint flag wasn't just attached to Dr. Reed's stop." Cho turned toward him. "The sheriff used the same discretionary code on 4 vehicles this month." He rotated the screen. Cho did not open the other files. "Preserve them," he said. "Nobody reviews them until the scope is authorized." For Simone, that was enough. Her arrest was approaching resolution. The county now had to decide whether what happened to her was an isolated misuse of discretion or part of something it had failed to notice. Cho locked the terminal archive at 11:38 and ordered everyone away from Harlan's cruiser. The 4 additional compliance flags would stay untouched until County Council approved a limited review. Harlan objected immediately. "You're expanding a bad arrest into a fishing expedition." Cho signed the preservation form without looking up. "No. I'm preventing records from changing while someone decides whether expansion is justified." Simone stood beside Sergeant Nand near the checkpoint table, tired enough now that the heat coming off the asphalt seemed to press through her shoes. And she had already won the immediate fight. The prosecutor had declined to authorize the obstruction charge, and Northgate had recovered the diagnostic case. Still, the 4 flags on the screen had changed what she wanted from the county. "I'm not asking you to prove those stops were discriminatory," she told Cho. "I'm asking you to compare what triggered the code, what officers did next, and whether the written procedure was applied the same way." Harlan gave a short laugh. "You've been here 2 hours and now you're auditing my department." "No," Simone said. "I'm telling you what question my arrest created." County Council joined by video from Cho's tablet. She authorized a narrow administrative review of the 5 flagged stops, limited to dispatch records, credential checks, body camera footage, and written checkpoint instructions. No personnel files, no unrelated traffic history. No assumptions about motive. Cho repeated the limits aloud before Mercer began opening anything. The first additional stop involved a Latino delivery driver whose commercial manifest had been questioned despite matching the route list. The second involved a white utility supervisor who had been flagged after arguing about a lane closure. The third was a black retired Army mechanic entering the corridor to repair a generator. The fourth was a white woman whose vehicle registration had initially returned an outdated address. The records were messy enough to resist a simple story. "That's what I've been saying," Harlan said. "The code isn't racial." Cho ignored the conclusion and kept comparing decisions. The utility supervisor had cursed at Mercer and refused to move his truck for nearly 4 minutes. And Harlan had warned him, then allowed him through once his work order was confirmed. The retired mechanic had provided a valid service credential within 40 seconds. Harlan had ordered him out of the vehicle, questioned whether he belonged on a defense route, and searched his tool compartment after the man consented because, according to his later complaint, he was afraid refusing would cost him the contract. Simone felt Nand shift beside her. "There," Nand said quietly. "Not yet," Simone answered. The delivery driver's case added another layer. His manifest was valid, but Harlan had held him 12 minutes while calling the contracting office. The white utility supervisor's paperwork had never been scanned at all. Cho built a comparison table on a legal pad. Documentation presented, verification result, discretionary flag, search request, detention time, enforcement outcome. By the 4th file, the pattern was no longer about who had been flagged. It was about what Harlan did after certain people produced valid documentation. Harlan leaned over the table. "You can make any 5 stops look ugly when you strip away context." Cho finally looked at him. "Then give me the context that explains why valid documentation ended the encounter for some drivers and escalated it for others." Harlan started with familiarity. Vehicle crews were known. Others required caution. Cho pointed out that the retired mechanic had serviced the corridor for 6 years. Harlan moved to behavior. Cho replayed the mechanic's body camera. The man had answered every question, offered his work order twice, and consented to the tool search. Harlan said the camera could not capture instinct. That answer changed Mercer's expression. "Sheriff, is that what you mean when you write compliance concern?" Harlan looked at him as if the question itself were disloyal. "It means I use judgment." "Based on what?" Cho stopped Mercer before the exchange became personal. He asked Harlan for the written criteria governing the discretionary code. Harlan could not produce any. The field had been added to the checkpoint system 6 months earlier as an officer's safety note. No county policy defined when it should be used, reviewed, or removed. Simone understood then that accountability would not fit neatly inside Harlan's personality. His choices mattered, but the county had handed him an undefined label that could convert instinct into a permanent record without requiring explanation. She gave Cho her 3 requests again, more precisely this time: clear her charge in writing, place Harlan's checkpoint decisions under independent administrative review, and suspend use of the compliance code until the county defined objective criteria and an appeal process. Cho wrote them down. County council asked for 1 hour to determine interim authority. Harlan was told to surrender checkpoint command and remain available for interview. He was not fired. He was not suspended. But at 12:07, the county systems administrator disabled the discretionary compliance field across every active checkpoint pending review. Harlan watched the option disappear from Mercer's screen. At 1:14 p.m., Simone sat in a conference room at Northgate with a paper cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. The diagnostic case had passed its seal inspection, but the morning certification could not simply restart. The interrupted custody chain required a fresh calibration cycle and a new transfer slot. Sergeant Nan placed the revised schedule in front of her. Earliest clean window is 3 weeks. Simone read the date twice. It landed on the weekend she had promised Marcus she would finally visit him in Tennessee. Major Ortiz entered with a secure message from the county prosecutor. Obstruction charge had been formally declined for filing. The booking record would remain as an arrest entry until the county records unit completed its correction process, but there would be no prosecution and no court appearance. Ortiz did not congratulate her. "That closes the criminal side for you," she said. "It doesn't answer why it happened." Simone called Marcus before the next meeting. He dropped it. He released a breath she had not realized he was holding. Then she told him about the new certification date. "So you're canceling on me again," he said. There was humor in it, but not much. Simone started explaining calibration windows, custody controls, and why nobody at Northgate could move the schedule just for her. Interrupted. "I know you have reasons. You always have reasons." She stared at the untouched coffee. "Yeah," she said, "I do." At the county administration building that afternoon, the consequences were more complicated than the clean ending Simone had imagined while sitting in cuffs. Harlan was the elected sheriff. Lieutenant Cho could remove him from a checkpoint assignment, but he could not suspend or fire him. County council could freeze a disputed reporting tool and preserve records, but she could not erase an elected office. The county prosecutor could decline Simone's charge, but she could not discipline the person who made the arrest. So the county used the authority it actually had. The compliance code remained disabled. All checkpoint operations involving Northgate access were transferred temporarily to Cho under an existing interagency traffic agreement. The county's independent inspector was assigned the 5 flagged stops and Harlan's amended arrest narrative. Mercer and the booking clerk received written anti-retaliation protections under county whistleblower policy, including direct reporting outside the sheriff's chain of command. Harlan attended the meeting with counsel. He did not apologize. He argued that disabling the code would make deputies second-guess legitimate safety instincts and that the comparison of 5 stops ignored thousands of uneventful contacts. Some of that, Simone thought, deserved examination. 5 records could reveal a problem without proving the size of it. She said so when the inspector asked whether she believed the review should begin with a finding of racial discrimination. Simone answered. Begin with the decisions: who was verified, who was doubted after verification, what extra burden was imposed, and what explanation existed at the time. If the pattern supports a conclusion, write that conclusion. Harlan looked almost surprised by the answer. So even she admits you don't know. Simone turned toward him. I know what happened to me. The inspector redirected them before the exchange could harden. He confirmed that Harlan's first narrative incorrectly stated Simone had failed to identify herself and omitted the successful credential scan. Whether that omission was deliberate would require interviews and comparison with the body camera record. The county issued a public correction stating that Simone had presented valid authorization before her arrest and that the obstruction charge had been declined. It did not call Harlan racist. It did not declare the investigation complete. Before Simone left, Cho handed her a copy of the revised checkpoint sheet. The blank discretionary field was gone. In its place were 3 required entries: reason for additional screening, factual basis, and supervisor review if a verified traveler was delayed more than 5 minutes. Deputies would have to write what they saw instead of selecting a label that explained nothing. The change was small enough to fit on one line of a form. Simone knew better than to confuse that with repair. Mercer still had to return to work under a sheriff he had contradicted. The retired mechanic had not yet been interviewed. Her own arrest record would take days to correct. And 3 weeks from now she would be back at Northgate instead of sitting on Marcus's porch. At 4:36 she walked out of the administration building and found Marcus leaning against her rental SUV with 2 paper bags from the diner whose reservation he had canceled. "You told me not to come," he said. "I changed my mind." He held out 1 bag. That must have hurt. Simone took it, more than the handcuffs. Behind them, workers at the county checkpoint replaced the morning instruction sheet with the revised version. The road stayed open while they did it. 12 days later, Simone returned to County Road 18 because the inspector wanted the revised checkpoint procedure tested under normal traffic, not demonstrated for a conference room. She arrived in her own car this time, carrying no sealed equipment and wearing jeans beneath her Northgate windbreaker. Mercer was working the east lane. When he recognized her, his shoulders drew tight for half a second. Then he looked at the tablet mounted beside the credential reader. "Good morning, Dr. Reed. Authorization, please." Simone handed him her credential. Mercer scanned it, waited for the green confirmation, and entered the verification result. A delivery van behind her received exactly the same process. So did a utility truck whose driver Mercer had known for years. Familiarity no longer replaced the check. When the utility driver complained about the extra minute, Mercer said, "New procedure," and pointed to the printed instruction fixed beneath the tablet. No argument, no improvised category. No judgment disguised as instinct. Cho observed from a county vehicle 50 yards away. He had deliberately refused to stand beside Mercer because he wanted to see whether the procedure worked without a supervisor breathing over someone's shoulder. Simone appreciated the choice. A policy that survived only when management watched was theater. The practical repair extended beyond the road. Her arrest entry had been corrected in the county system 3 days earlier, with the decline charge linked to the original booking record, so background checks would not display an unresolved obstruction case. Northgate had received the correction directly. The county also reimbursed the towing and rental extension costs created by the detention. Simone had declined an offer to submit the canceled family dinner as an expense. Marcus had laughed when she told him, "Good, I refuse to become a line item." Mercer's protection had proved less tidy. Harlan had removed him from preferred weekend traffic assignments, claiming staffing needs. Mercer reported the change through the outside channel Cho had established. The county restored the assignments pending review. But Mercer told Simone he now checked the duty board every morning before coffee. "I used to think retaliation meant somebody yelling at you," he said. "Turns out it can look like somebody moving your same 3 boxes down." The booking clerk had submitted her own statement. She described hearing Mercer confirm the valid scan, watching Harlan omit it from the first arrest narrative, and entering his later description of Simone as argumentative, without challenging whether it belonged in the record. Her statement did not flatter herself. She wrote that she had known the wording was becoming less factual and had stayed quiet because Harlan controlled scheduling at the substation. "I kept telling myself I was only typing what he said," she told the inspector. "That was how I made doing nothing sound neutral." Simone read that sentence twice when the inspector showed it to her. She did not feel forgiveness arrive. What she felt was recognition. Silence had been one of the mechanisms that morning, but so had fear, habit, bad policy, and a sheriff accustomed to having his impressions entered as facts. Naming those things did not make them equal. It made them harder to hide inside one word like attitude. The review of the 5 discretionary flags had also produced a measurable finding. In 4 cases, Harlan imposed additional scrutiny after documentation had already been verified. 3 of those drivers were people of color. The sample was too small for the county to claim a department-wide statistical pattern, and the inspector refused to do so. But the files did establish repeated departures from written procedure, inconsistent treatment of comparable drivers, unsupported compliance labeling, and inaccurate reporting in Simone's arrest. Harlan responded through counsel. He maintained that race had not influenced him and argued that the county was replacing experienced judgment with paperwork. He did, however, amend one point. He no longer claimed Simone had failed to identify herself. He called that statement an error made during a fast-moving stop. Simone accepted the correction without accepting the explanation. Before she left the checkpoint, a black electrician in a service van rolled up with a locked fiberglass equipment box secured behind his seat. Mercer scanned his credential, received confirmation, and waved him through without asking to open it. The driver barely noticed anything unusual had happened. Simone did. 3 weeks earlier, a sealed case had been enough for Harlan to turn her presence into suspicion. Now, the written rule required a reason before suspicion could become action, and the absence of a reason meant the box stayed closed. The inspector's final findings were due the following Monday. The inspector released his findings Monday at 10 a.m. Simone received the report at Northgate between 2 calibration checks, with Marcus on speaker from Tennessee and a fresh cup of coffee going cold beside her keyboard. She skipped the executive summary and went straight to the chronology. The county had reconstructed all 5 flagged stops, interviewed 11 people, reviewed body camera footage, dispatch audio, scanner histories, Harlan's cruiser archive, and every version of Simone's arrest narrative. The conclusion was narrower than the headlines some people would have wanted and stronger than Harlan had predicted. The inspector could not determine Harlan's private motive with certainty. He could determine his conduct. Harlan had repeatedly subjected verified drivers to requirements not found in checkpoint policy, applied those requirements inconsistently, and used the undefined compliance field to document impressions that were not supported by observable behavior. Simone's arrest had been unsupported by the facts available when it was made. The report devoted 4 pages to race. 3 of the 5 drivers who received additional scrutiny after verification were people of color, while similarly situated white drivers had received less intrusive treatment. The sample was too limited for a statistical conclusion about the sheriff's office as a whole, but the inspector found enough comparative evidence to conclude that racial disparity was a credible factor requiring corrective action, training, and continued external review. Simone read that paragraph twice, then stopped. Marcus heard the silence. "You okay? I thought I wanted them to say more. And now?" She looked at the calibration rack across the room, its indicator lights moving through the same measured cycle they had run hundreds of times. Now I think I wanted them to say exactly what they could prove." Harlan issued a statement through counsel that afternoon. He disputed any suggestion that race had influenced his decisions, but accepted that the checkpoint procedure had been inconsistently applied. He announced that he would no longer personally supervise Northgate access operations while the county implemented revised standards. Because he was elected, the inspector could not remove him. The report was instead forwarded to the State Law Enforcement Standards Board for review of his reporting practices and use of discretionary detention authority. At the county substation, repair looked less impressive than a press release. The booking clerk now had authority to flag factual conflicts in arrest narratives before final submission. Every credential verification remained attached to the associated incident record rather than living in a separate system. Verified travelers delayed beyond 5 minutes triggered automatic supervisory review. The compliance field was permanently retired. Cho also required quarterly comparison audits of additional screening decisions for the next year, with results sent outside the sheriff's chain of command. Mercer kept his job and his restored assignments. He also received a written reprimand for failing to challenge the inaccurate roadside account when he first recognized it. Simone asked Cho why the county disciplined someone who had eventually preserved the evidence that exposed the problem. Cho answered because protecting him from retaliation doesn't mean pretending he did everything right. Simone thought about it, then nodded. Mercer had spoken late. Late had mattered. So had speaking at all. The booking clerk faced no discipline but volunteered for the first records integrity training session. When Simone saw her afterward, the woman looked uncomfortable enough to leave. Instead, she stayed beside the vending machines and said, "I'm sorry I typed those words like they were facts." Simone did not rescue her from the awkwardness. "You knew they weren't." The clerk nodded. "I did." Simone held her gaze for another moment. "Then remember that next time." It was not forgiveness, but it was something the woman could use. That evening, Simone drove to Marcus's rental house outside the city. He had extended his trip without telling her and was standing at the kitchen counter trying to rescue a pan of cornbread he had left in too long. "You're late," he said. 4 minutes. He pointed the spatula at her. "I have documentation." She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound felt strange after weeks of interviews, forms, timestamps, and people discussing her worst morning in rooms she was not always allowed to enter. Marcus cut away the burned edge and served the rest anyway. For almost an hour, neither of them mentioned Harlan. Before leaving, Simone checked her phone and found a message from Cho confirming that the last unresolved correction had posted. Her county record now showed the arrest as closed, charge declined, factual narrative amended. She turned the screen toward Marcus. He read it, handed the phone back, and said, "Good. Now put it away," Simone did. The following morning, she returned to Northgate for the certification Harlan's stop had delayed. Outside the annex, vehicles moved through the county checkpoint under the new procedure. Mercer scanned a credential, checked the green confirmation, and waved the driver forward. No one watching from a distance would have known anything had changed. That was the point. The certification finished at 2:18 that afternoon. Simone removed the diagnostic unit from its case inside Northgate's controlled lab, connected the calibrated leads, and watched the final test sequence settle into specification. 2 weeks earlier, Wade Harlan had demanded that she open the same case beside a county road because he had decided her questions were suspicious. Now she broke the numbered seal where the procedure required it, signed the result, and passed the completed packet to Major Ortiz. 7 weeks later, the county closed its administrative response. Harlan remained sheriff, because neither Cho nor the inspector had authority to remove an elected official. The county board did, however, make Northgate checkpoint operations permanently independent of his office, and the State Law Enforcement Standards Board issued a formal finding that his arrest narrative contained materially inaccurate information, and that his use of discretionary detention required remedial review. Harlan contested the finding through the process available to him. The correction to Simone's case remained intact while he did. The county also published the first quarterly screening audit. Every verified traveler who received additional scrutiny now had a documented factual basis attached to the decision. Supervisors reviewed delays beyond 5 minutes, and the reports separated safety concerns from conduct complaints instead of blending both into vague language about cooperation. The first quarter showed fewer additional searches, but Cho refused to call that success by itself. The meaningful number was simpler. No verified traveler had been arrested for refusing a search that officers could not independently justify. Mercer stayed with the department. His reprimand remained in his file, along with the inspector's finding that his later preservation of the scanner record had been essential to reconstructing Simone's stop. When Simone saw him at the checkpoint months later, he did not apologize again. He scanned her credential, checked the confirmation, and said, "You're clear." She preferred that to another speech. The booking clerk changed too. She helped design a records prompt requiring clerks to distinguish an officer's characterization from an observable fact. Argumentative could still appear in a narrative, but the system now asked what the person had actually said or done. The clerk later told Simone that the extra field annoyed almost everyone during the first week. Simone smiled. Good systems are allowed to be inconvenient. Her relationship with Marcus required a repair that no county policy could handle. The weekend after certification, Simone drove to Tennessee without her work laptop. Marcus inspected the empty passenger seat when she arrived. "You forget something?" She handed him a grocery bag. "I brought pie." He looked inside. "Store-bought?" I said I was changing. I didn't say I'd become somebody else. They spent Saturday replacing 2 warped boards on his back porch. Simone measured the first one wrong and blamed his tape measure before admitting she had read the mark badly. Marcus made enough of the mistake to irritate her, then dropped it before the joke turned into a lesson. By sunset, they were sitting on the steps with sawdust on their jeans, discussing nothing more consequential than whether the porch needed stain before winter. The arrest did not become a story Simone enjoyed telling. She declined television interviews and ignored 2 invitations to speak about resilience. When Northgate asked what recognition she wanted placed in her personnel file, she requested only that the delayed certification be recorded as completed without performance deficiency. Her career had not needed a sheriff's mistake to become meaningful. Months later, Major Ortiz brought her a different proposal. Defense Command was creating a small regional assurance team to examine how civilian agencies handled access credentials when federal facilities depended on local roads, hospitals, utilities, and emergency services. It was not an investigation of Harlan, and it carried no disciplinary authority. The assignment would require Simone to spend 6 months testing whether new procedures worked when nobody knew an evaluator was coming. Simone read the travel schedule before she read the title. 6 months meant missed weekends if she let it. Marcus's porch came to mind before County Road 18 did. She closed the folder and told Ortiz she would give her an answer after checking the calendar she had promised herself mattered. On her way out, Simone passed the lab where the black transit case rested on a shelf with a new numbered seal. She ran one finger across the label, then kept walking toward the parking lot with the unopened proposal under her arm.